Welcome to Rowing with the Homies. I'm Finlos, and I'm so glad you're here. On this show, we focus on the idea that moving our bodies helps us to work through the stuff that weighs on our minds. And today, I'm diving into the topic of how we decide what's true and how we attribute blame in a world that feels increasingly polarized. And I hope for this to be a space where we can put in the work, the physical work and the mental work together. We'll explore big ideas and tough questions, and hopefully by the end we'll both feel a little stronger and a little clearer. And let's get right into what's been on my mind. And today, unfortunately, there was another shooting, this one in Texas at an ICE facility. And immediately what I observed is how quickly the reporting on the story has become polarized, how the conversations from law enforcement has become polarized, how the conversation from lawmakers and government officials has become polarized, so that the actual evidence at hand, the actual events that we're witnessing, are almost irrelevant to the narrative that's being written. And so I've been thinking about how we form our opinions and assign blame. And blame might not be the best word because it feels so negative, but maybe we find accountability, especially when it comes to volatile events. Because when scary things, when shocking things, when horrible things happen, we always want to be able to point somewhere and say that's why. And so there was an article I was reading on the website Mediaite about the shooting at the ICE facility, and it spoke to sort of the idea that I've been having. And basically what the author stated was that many on the left are quick to blame the Trump administration's rhetoric, while some on the right are quick to blame anti-Trump rhetoric. And that's generally the discourse. But really the deeper issue that is discussed, and what I think is valuable, is the difference between making decisions and attributing blame based on solid evidence and lived experiences versus doing it based on pre-existing cultural or social narratives. And so the writer of this article was discussing how, unfortunately, it is framed in a very polarized way, but people on the left tend to want to find evidence and concrete specific details before something receives blame, versus folks on the right who want to say it's the culture or it's the institutions that are causing these problems. And they point the finger at the radical leftists who are causing these problems. And ultimately what it creates is two realities. One reality grounded in observable facts and the genuine impact of events on people's lives. And the other reality is a story we tell ourselves to reinforce our tribal loyalties and to drive a wedge between us and the other side. And to be clear, I think that both sides are guilty of this. I think that those on the air quote left and right blame each other for all of the problems in the world and in our country, much to the harm of everybody. So I do differ somewhat in that sort of binary frame, but I do think that when we're looking for causes, when we're looking for reasons, when we're looking for the whys and the hows, evidence and experience are the places from where we should be drawing conclusions. And that just doesn't seem to be happening as much. So as we consider this shooting at the ICE facility, one approach is to look at the available evidence, the shooter's history, their specific motivations, and the circumstances of the event. The other approach is to immediately slot the event into a familiar story. As in, this is a direct result of political division, or this is what happens when X political group does Y. The first approach tries to understand. The second tries to confirm a bias. And now, the article that I'm referencing was written before a lot of the details were out. They knew that it was a lone gunman, and that apparently he had written some messages on his bullet casings. Specifically, I think it said anti-ice, and it looked like it was written with a Sharpie marker. But more has come out since then, and he has apparently left notes saying that he was targeting ICE and wanted them to experience fear. But it does not really go into his ideologies or his motives per se, because while those are not excuses and they do not remove his role in the harm being done, they might at least explain the mindset in which he was operating. But unfortunately, I think this plays into a larger narrative, including when we're talking about conversations with the murder of Charlie Kirk, etc., which we'll get into. But the harm of the divide becomes even clearer when we look at how it affects policy and the institutions that we rely on. There is a really concerning trend toward things like the ongoing defunding of organizations like the CDC, scientific research groups, and universities that are seen as supportive of diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. And they're not just like budget cuts. It's a systemic move away from decision-making based on reliable, research-based evidence and toward cultural or political motives. Like, we can look at this in any number of contexts. Take the discussion around immigration and economics. A conversation based on evidence might cite data from the National Bureau of Economic Research that shows immigration has a small but positive impact on wages for even native-born workers, and a more significant positive impact on the economy as a whole. This evidence-based approach would lead to a discussion about how to optimize these benefits. But a conversation driven by cultural narrative might ignore this data and instead use the shooting at the ICE facility as a touchstone to support the broad conclusion that immigrants are a drain on the economy, or are dangerous to our society, or cause disruptions. And it avoids the complexity of the economic data and instead uses an isolated tragic event to reinforce a political and cultural position, which in turn is used to justify policies that harm immigrants and the economy, and not to mention the constant stream of cultural stereotypes, misinformation, and outright lies about the origins of most of the immigrants that come to the United States, their situations, why they're fleeing, if they are fleeing, why they have been invited, if they have been invited. There are so many reasons, and it's complex, and it's hard, and the data indicates that the vast majority of immigrants want to work, and are here to work, and already pay taxes. But this pattern of abandoning scientific or research-based evidence for decision-making is becoming more and more common. For example, the Trump administration has recently attempted to link autism to Tylenol use during pregnancy, and it's based on a fundamental misreading of scientific data. While a few studies have found a possible correlation between autism and Tylenol use during pregnancy. A large-scale 2024 Swedish study using sibling data found no causal link. And again, that correlative study does not indicate causation. It doesn't ask the follow-up questions. Why were the pregnant women taking Tylenol? Why did they have fevers? Why were they experiencing pain? And was it actually those underlying causes of the symptoms that might be connected to autism, not the Tylenol? Leading medical organizations like the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists and the World Health Organization have consistently stated that acetaminophen, the main ingredient of Tylenol, is the safest over-the-counter pain reliever for pregnant women, and that the claims are not supported by the overwhelming body of scientific evidence. I'm not here arguing that we should always trust medical research, because most medical research is done by the medical companies themselves, which by and large are profit-seeking organizations and institutions. The medical industry in the United States is all kinds of fucked. But that does not discount the reality of medical research. It does not discount the reality that there is evidence and evidence-based research and peer-reviewed papers and ongoing discourse and challenging of scientific data that over time yield reliable results. But instead, what this is highlighting is a broader cultural distrust of mainstream science, which is continuously being pushed by very nefarious actors in our culture, not just here in the United States, but around the world, which puts people at risk by discouraging the use of medication that could treat dangerous fevers during pregnancy, something that is very treatable very safely. We see this same divide in the way we talk about climate change. The overwhelming majority of climate scientists from around the world agree that human activity is the primary driver of climate change. The data on rising global temperatures, melting ice caps, and extreme weather events is clear and consistent. Yet one side of the conversation often dismisses this evidence as a hoax, or my favorite, a con job, and focuses on the cultural narrative that frames climate action as a threat to economic freedom. This leads to policies that roll back environmental protections, install renewable energy projects, even as the verifiable harm of inaction, from devastating floods to prolonged droughts, become more and more apparent. The harm of this divide isn't just about abstract policy. It's about the very real experience of people losing their homes and livelihoods to climate-related disasters. And again, with gun control, the conversation is often divided between evidence and cultural narrative. On one side, public health researchers and organizations like the CDC, or Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, present data showing that specific gun control measures like background checks and red flag laws can lead to a reduction in gun violence. They treat gun violence as a public health crisis, a problem with verifiable causes and potential solutions. And on the other side, the conversation often centers on the cultural narrative of the Second Amendment as an absolute right that should not be infringed upon under any circumstances. This narrative often dismisses or actively suppresses research into gun violence, prioritizing a political and cultural stance over the lived experience of communities grappling with the trauma of mass shootings and daily gun violence. The harm of this divide is tangible. It's the constant fear and loss of life that communities experience when evidence-based solutions are rejected in favor of political ideology. The danger here is that we stop listening to each other when we believe that someone's lived experience is just a talking point. We lose the ability to empathize. We become so focused on winning the argument that we forget there are real people with real feelings at the heart of the issue. And that brings me to a core question. How do we find a shared language to talk about difficult events when we're constantly being pulled into separate narratives? And this challenge of separating truth from narrative gets me thinking. And I'm thinking about its broader impact on a macro level. It's not just a political problem. It's a fundamental challenge to the way we function as a society. When we stop valuing evidence and lived experience, we erode the very foundations of truth. We replace shared reality with a collection of competing narratives, and this can lead to a state of collective confusion and distrust. If we can't agree on what happened, how can we ever agree on how to move forward? This is a major factor in the decline of trust in institutions. According to a 2023 Gallup poll, trust in Congress stood at just 8%, the lowest on record. When we believe that our leaders are motivated by narrative instead of genuine desire to evolve. This is a major factor in the decline of institutional trust. According to a 2023 Gallup poll, trust in Congress stood at just 8%, the lowest on record. When we believe that our leaders are motivated by narrative instead of a genuine desire to solve problems, we lose faith in their ability to govern effectively. The same can be said for journalism, science, and even our neighbors. The rise of toxic social media communities like the manosphere and groypers is a symptom of this same problem. These online spaces thrive on algorithms that prioritize engagement over truth, creating echo chambers where ideological positions are reinforced without challenge. But the most insidious result isn't just a radicalization into a rigid ideology. For many, the ultimate product is a sense of ideological disengagement, a feeling that nothing matters, that there is no purpose. These communities often start by offering simple, seemingly logical solutions to real feelings of frustration, isolation, or lack of purpose. They tell young men that their struggles are not their fault, but rather the result of a conspiracy or society acting against them. They offer a sense of belonging and a clear-cut enemy, but as people go deeper into these online worlds, they often find that the promised sense of purpose is hollow. Instead of building something, they are only tearing things down. The constant focus on grievances and blame can lead to a state of nihilism, a feeling that productive effort is pointless because the world is rigged against them. This is a symptom of the devaluation of healthy debate and the failure to acknowledge multiple perspectives. In a world where every conversation is about winning and losing, it's easy to become exhausted and give up on the idea of finding shared purpose. The toxicity of these online spaces is a direct consequence of a society that has lost the ability to find consensus on things supported by real-world experiences and data. It's a tragedy of our time. The very tools we have for connection are also the ones that are causing the deepest sense of isolation and meaninglessness. But how can we, on a daily basis, resist the temptation to fall into these prepackaged narratives and instead seek out a more nuanced understanding of the world? The challenge of fighting against the noise is real, but it is not hopeless. The solutions lie in a shift from passive consumption to intentional action, and a multi-pronged approach is needed to rebuild a healthier information ecosystem and a shared sense of purpose. First, we have to recognize and call out this process when we see it. Beyond that, we must take tangible steps to counter the erosion of a shared reality. We need to create spaces for intentional dialogue. This is to counter the polarization of social media, which requires a commitment to real-world, in-person connection. Instead of engaging in debates designed to win, we can seek out brave conversations with people who hold different perspectives. The goal is not to change minds, but to understand the lived experiences and underlying values that inform their views. This can be done by joining local community groups, volunteering, or even intentionally seeking out conversations with neighbors who may have different political beliefs. These interactions remind us of our shared humanity and make it harder to dehumanize others based on a two-dimensional social media profile. We can practice information hygiene. Just as we are mindful of what we eat, we must be intentional about what information we consume. And this means actively curating our media diet by seeking out diverse news sources, fact-checking information before sharing it, and being critical of content that triggers strong emotional responses. A key strategy is to inoculate yourself against misinformation by learning to spot common manipulation tactics, such as ad hominem attacks or personal attacks, appeals to emotions, and the use of decontextualized data. Taking a break from social media, or even just unfollowing accounts that are consistently toxic or polarizing, can also be a powerful form of self-preservation. Support the infrastructure of truth. The ongoing defunding of institutions like the CDC, scientific research, and universities is a direct attack on the very foundations of evidence-based decision-making. As individuals, we can push back by supporting these organizations, advocating for public funding for research, and standing up for academic freedom. We can also support local journalism, which is a vital check on power and a source of community-specific, verifiable information. When we invest in the institutions that produce and distribute reliable knowledge, we are collectively building a more resilient society that is less vulnerable to fabricated narratives. And we can cultivate purpose outside of ideology. The rise of communities like the manosphere is often fueled by a sense of purposelessness and a search for belonging. The most effective counter to this is to help people find genuine purpose and community in the real world. This means encouraging and supporting participation in hobbies, sports, artistic pursuits, or volunteer work. When individuals are engaged in activities that give them a sense of meaning and mastery, they are less likely to be drawn into online echo chambers that offer a false sense of identity and purpose through a shared ideology of grievance. And this brings me to the final segment. And today, depression feels like believing in the truth of my own experience. Living with depression is a constant exercise in navigating the gap between what's real and what a cultural narrative tells me is real. There is a persistent, usually unspoken story that says you should be able to snap out of it, that the struggle is a sign of weakness, and that I can be fixed if I just try harder. But that's a narrative, not a reality. My lived experience tells me something different. It tells me that some days, just getting out of bed and taking a shower and making coffee, each of those steps is a monumental victory. It tells me that the progress I make is often slow and non-linear. It tells me that I am strong not because I don't feel depressed, but because I continue to live and function while carrying the weight of that experience. The struggle to trust my own experience is a central aspect of my journey. The world often tells me I am wrong for feeling this way. It tells me my feelings are a problem to be solved, not a part of my reality to be understood. And this can be deeply isolating. It makes me feel alone sometimes. But every moment I recognize and validate my own experiences is a win. Every day that I am relatively healthy and functional as an adult living with depression is evidence of my strength. And the same goes for you. Every step in your day is a win. So today, depression feels like the quiet, unwavering belief that the truth of our experience, a belief that helps me navigate the weirdness of the world with a compass that I know that I can trust, and that is my experience. I understand, though, that my experience is my own, and people experience depression differently, and there are good days and bad days. And if on those days it's feeling like too much, you're feeling overwhelmed, remember that you are not alone, and it is okay to seek help, to ask for support, to find someone who can listen. And I encourage you to do so. The concepts that I went through today are all tied to the same core ideas. The search for truth in a world of narratives, whether it's the political narratives that divide us or the personal narratives that can make us feel isolated. The challenge is the same: to trust that our own sense of reality, as we find the evidence to support what we're experiencing, can help guide us through this world with empathy. Thank you for sharing your time with me today. It's good to know that we're in this together. If you can, please share this content if you think it has any value, and subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast platform so you get notified about new episodes. Let's do the work and keep moving forward. I look forward to our next conversation.